Welcome to our posts. Today, we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Completely delete a client company's website and email services. Are you sure? Okay. This happened a few years ago, so details are a bit fuzzy and chat is paraphrased. I was T2 tech support for a company that handles my country's largest ISP's entire professional email services, all its DNS management services, and a large portion of its website building and web hosting services. This company is tiny, minute, not even a blip in the radar, but has power that I will likely never again hold at my fingertips. One day, a ticket comes in from ISP. Big client company is moving away from our proprietary email services and into Microsoft 365, or some such equivalent change. This usually meant I got to help the client through the process of changing DNS records, migrating inboxes, or just backing up emails, and even actually setting up some stuff on the Microsoft side. Technically not my job. But the ISP's T1 tech support was woefully untrained for anything even remotely technical, and terribly unprepared for most things merely commercial, and my company was awesome and treated me right. So, ticket. ISP. Client is moving from Service X to Service Y. Please remove their subscription from the database. Me, there seems to be some sort of mistake, which was very common. We remove them from there once the new service is set up and running. Otherwise, it will delete everything in their subscribed package, including all email storage, DNS records, and website. You likely want to change their subscription to not include email services, but keep the rest, since your Microsoft subscription doesn't include DNS and web hosting management. And even that change only after they have their new email service set up. ISP, yada yada, confirm, remove their subscription. Me, are you absolutely sure? This process is not recoverable. All their emails, DNS records, and entire website, including database, will be permanently deleted. ISP, request has been submitted. Remove subscription. At this point, it's been a couple of days since the first ticket, so I call my boss, over absolutely wonderful guy and extremely intelligent, and tell him what they're asking me to do. Boss, all right, let's show them they pay us because we know things and they don't. Don't delete the subscription, but suspend all the services that would be affected. Keep those tickets at hand and expect a phone call. If they call you, tell them to talk to me. God, that felt good. I felt bad for the client, because their entire company basically shut down for an afternoon. But when they called my work phone directly from ISP Uncommon, usually just for emergencies, and the nice lady asked me what had happened with client in that tone that says, I'm doing my best to hear all sides before making a decision, but I am freaking the hell out right now. And I directed her to the tickets where I very clearly stated what would happen if I did what they told me to, and then told her to call boss. I felt so vindicated. Boss later told me to let them sweat for a couple of hours, because the process should have been unrecoverable, and then turn the services back on. ISP was, yet again, absolutely thrilled with us, and my name kept coming up even more often as the person that solves things. Next story. I bit my dental hygienist. So this morning I went to my dentist's office to have a root planning, which is where a dentist numbs your mouth and a dental hygienist cleans under your gums. At some point the dental hygienist had asked me to close my mouth, and I closed my mouth halfway. She got annoyed and told me again to close my mouth. I closed it almost all the way. She gasped and barked at me, "Close it." The reason why I didn't close it all the way was because she was holding my bottom lip with a mirror on a stick and her pinky was between my teeth. But I thought to myself, okay, if you insist on yelling at me to close my mouth, I will. So I closed my mouth and bit her pinky. She then yelled and shook her hand in pain. Next story. HR and payroll manager asked to automate their decisions away. In my first job, I worked in it as an access and permissions administrator at a large company with significant technological debt. The environment included custom software dating back to the Windows 9X and even DOS era. Initially, the work was quite tedious, involving a lot of back and forth communication between multiple departments. We had to ensure that each employee had the necessary training and documentation to access data in the scope requested by their manager. Additionally, we needed approval from the manager of the department related to the system role in question. On top of that, the company's excessive paper-only bureaucratic workflow made the work go at a snail's pace. A single SAP account for a blue-collar worker required at least 3 forms signed by different people. The heads of departments responsible for signing those papers didn't feel any urgency to send them to us quickly. A good example of this is when I, myself, waited over 2 weeks after being hired in the department before my first account was set up. Until then, I only had a guest account that allowed me to access the main internal website with the company's procedures, regulations, and other basic information. Up to this point, each signed form had to be physically delivered to us, which was agonizingly slow given that the company had multiple branches. We decided to automate away the paperwork. Our first step was to allow the use of scanned documents. It was a partial success. While it eliminated the courier delays, management still required us to sign the physical copies afterward, which we mass stamped at the end of each month. The next step was to introduce a fully electronic workflow. We faced significant resistance from upper management, so we had to settle on a system that mostly replicated the existing paper processes. Despite this, it was a game changer. We created presets that managers could select and customize as needed, using data from these customizations to create better-fitting presets. We also developed workflows that automatically generated and assigned subtickets for necessary approvals and tracked how long it took, sending reminders if needed. And finally, we got an approval from HR to access layoff data to generate user block removal tickets. Sometime after we rolled out the new system, the HR payroll manager made a big fuss. She was furious that her team was still waiting weeks to get their permissions and questioned whether all our work had been for nothing. That really struck a chord with me. Inside, I was overjoyed, but I did my best to keep a neutral expression. At that time, we were working on summary reports with burn-down and bottleneck charts, and I already knew that tickets requesting HR payroll access were spending over most of their lifespan waiting for her or one of her sub-managers to approve them. The manager immediately went on the defensive, claiming she couldn't keep up with the amount of tickets. She then requested a change. She wanted any request from her employee to be automatically approved within the relevant scope of their sub-department. For example, a request for an HR worker to have full HR access and limited payroll access would be automatically approved for HR access, but not for payroll, and vice versa. I was skeptical, but weren't exactly in a position to argue. I asked my boss to join the discussion and explained that the goal was to prevent overly permissive approvals that could lead to unauthorized access. I tried to convince her to brainstorm together potential edge cases before making a blanket approval, but she was already set on her decision and wasn't interested in discussing details. My boss shrugged and said it would be her responsibility. He told her to write up an official document outlining the change, and we would proceed with the implementation. The only request we had was to include a line that each such request would still be created, assigned to as normal and marked as automatically approved by name of the main HR payroll manager decision. I uploaded the scan into our system and, anticipating that it would eventually backfire, made a photocopy to keep it handy in the top drawer of my desk. The original copy went to the archive. A few weeks later, she stormed into our room. The speed with which she flung open the door made it clear she was furious. She demanded to know why we had granted full access to payroll data to her subordinate. I think it was the only time I ever heard anyone yell in the company. I calmly reminded her of her request to automatically approve in-department access requests. She wasn't having it, explaining that one of her low-ranking subordinates from the payroll sub-department had accessed the salaries of everyone in their department, including managers, and was unhappy with the paycheck disparity. Isn't that obvious that they shouldn't be able to do that? Well, yeah, to a human, but that decision was automated away by your request. I handed her a copy of the document she had signed, which instructed us to automatically approve any and all such tickets without exception. Immediately afterward, she asked us to roll back the change while she wrote up another document to cancel the previous one. In the following days, she meticulously reviewed all those tickets and requested us to reduce access for several users. I have to admit, she did a thorough job and kept up a good pace in reviewing new requests, doing it daily instead of once every week or two as before. In the end, we managed to distill a subset of permissions that could be approved automatically and proceeded to implement a similar approach with other departments. P.S. I don't know whether that payroll employee managed to get the raise, but I'm sure they weren't fired, as we didn't receive any tickets to block or remove any accounts from that department in the following months. Next story. Doing exactly what I was told. I used to work as a driver for a freight company. We used to handle awkward-sized items that no other couriers would touch. We delivered everything from coffins to tractor parts. We also had to collect things from our customers for delivery the next day. This company had a mixture of contractors and permanent drivers. I was a relief driver. I knew most of the routes, so I covered holidays or sickness. The management of the depot consisted of a delivery manager and a collection manager. These two people didn't quite see eye to eye, as sometimes getting the stuff delivered conflicted with getting stuff collected, and their targets reflected failures in a bad way. This particular day, I had to cover a contractor's route. I didn't know the route, so as we had to load our trucks, this took a little longer than usual. I had around 45 deliveries that day, which is high for this predominantly rural route. I asked my manager, the delivery manager, if he knew the route. He replied that he did and ordered my route for me, so I was good to go, albeit a bit late. I did say that with the volume I had, I may struggle, and I asked him to keep an eye out for me. He said okay. I got to near midday and realized that I wasn't going to be able to complete all the deliveries, and the collections wouldn't get done either. I also noted that one of the collections was off route and the contractor had a vehicle in that area anyway. I called in and spoke to my manager delivery and told him he had a choice of collections or deliveries. I also asked why the contractor couldn't cover the off-route collection. I was told to call back later and he'll see if can sort something out. He also said that the off-route collection would have to be done too. I called back later and asked for help again. He said there was no help available. So I gave him the option of deliveries or collections. As there wasn't time to do both, I will get to the time a bit later. He categorically said both had to be done. The delivery manager went home, so I called in again and got the collection manager. She reiterated that there was no help at all, so either I failed the deliveries or failed the collections. If that happened, I'd have been hauled into the office the next day. So cue malicious compliance. I called into one of the collections and I asked what time they closed. 6:30 p.m. they said. So I said I'd be back later. I carried on with the deliveries, which took me further away from that collection. At the appropriate time, I stopped delivering and drove to the collection. I collect 2 small parcels. That was all. I then drove back to where I had stopped and carried on delivering. This cost me about an hour. I finished my last delivery at 7:15 p.m. I had a 45-minute drive back to my yard. As I was leaving the round, I got a frantic call from the collection manager. She was wondering where I was. I told her what had happened and told her that I'd asked for help 4 times and was told I had to do everything allocated, so I did, and it wasn't my fault that it happened like this. Here's where the trouble really started. The company's trunking system is a fluid one. It depends on trucks leaving the depot at a certain time. For our depot, the cutoff time is 7:30 p.m. I wheeled in at just after 8 p.m. There were 15 pissed-off guys on overtime waiting for me to turn up and an articulated truck waiting for these 2 parcels. This wait caused the whole trunking system to be late the next day. My routing was discussed when I got back, as it was questionable at best. When I told the collections manager that it was the delivery manager that organized it, There were angry emails between the delivery and collection managers, and I would imagine that the logistics team would have demanded an explanation too. Arses were definitely kicked. The next day, no one said a word. I wasn't on that route and going forward. Well, for a little while, they either helped when I asked or didn't get me to do as much. Also, as I had exceeded legal driving time, they had to make sure I went home early for a few days, so a bit of a win there. The biggest trouble these guys had was they always assumed that the drivers were after an easy day, and even when presented with the evidence, assumed that you were still trying to be fly. This time it bit them badly. Next story. Who is really watching the clock? Backstory. I used to work in hotels years ago. The hotel I worked at has a policy where there must be at least one staff member at the hotel 24/7. I worked the unenviable but fireproof position of part-time front desk and relief night audit, so I never knew when I was going to be working. 16-hour shifts were uncommon but expected of me when the main night audit called in sick. The story. I had a middle manager who got bored and liked to ruffle feathers for entertainment. Annoying, but I only had to deal with it for 2 to 3 days a week because no one else wants to cover the night audit, so I suck it up and deal. They also loved to sleep in and would routinely call in late in the mornings. I really couldn't stand them, but they were my boss, so after giving the essential information and passed the torch from the night audit to the morning manager and crew, I clocked out promptly and got out of the line of fire. So I thought, I get a call waking me up at 11 a.m. because I was sleeping off my graveyard shift that night. I was told to report to the hotel for a disciplinary meeting that includes middle manager and the general manager of the hotel, my boss's boss. I asked them what the meeting was about, and they replied that it was due to my excessive use of overtime. I then asked them if I could come in before my shift that night so that I could actually get some sleep for my next graveyard shift. They replied that I would have to arrive within the hour. It took me 30 minutes to drive to get there, or they would tack on insubordination or some other nonsense to my file as well. I needed the job for rent, so I complied and got to the hotel half asleep. As I am driving, I am trying to figure out how to explain away the nice overtime additions on my paycheck. Took me a solid 10 minutes, but I remembered that the middle manager had yet to actually show up on time for the past month. That wakes me up more, and I show up to the meeting absolutely cheerful and smiling, much to the displeasure of the GM and my boss. Boss goes on a tirade about how abusing company time is horrible in many different ways. I no longer have my crap-eating grin, but I am also unfazed by the dressing down and let them blow out their steam that was likely put on them by payroll or HR about how my paychecks were getting too fat for their liking. This is confirmed by a shorter but more professional dress-down by my GM about me costing the company excess money and that I should know better because I run the hotel's books. I calmly state that all of the overtime statements were true and that I would like to compare my punch times to the staffing schedule and the start-end times of the people I was relieving in the evening and who was relieving me in the morning. I explained to them that I was only staying on until the next crew relieved me, and I had sufficient time to brief the incoming crew per the corporate policy of the hotel must be manned 24/7. They do and see that there is only a 3-5-minute overlap between my shift and the person relieving me. GM looks pissed and middle manager went from smug to looking like they got their hand caught in the cookie jar as their clock-ins showed usually 7-ish and sometimes even 7:30 when their start time was 6. I was then told by the GM that they would reimburse me for the minutes to drive to and from the hotel as well as the duration of the meeting, and that the write-up was being dropped in light of new information. Fallout. Middle manager still made my life miserable until I left. But at least they never gave me grief about overtime after that and actually started showing up to work at 6 a.m. and not snooze until 7. My paychecks were less, but at least I got more sleep because I was now better able to beat the morning commute at the end of my shift. Edit. I knew my paychecks were coming in hefty for my wage. I never made a stink about staying late because hotels pay maybe 5 cents more than minimum wage if you work graveyard shifts. I kept my mouth shut about my check. I needed that extra cash and dealt with the sleep deprivation for the almost guaranteed additional hour of overtime at the expense of a lazy and petty boss. I had my moment of, how do I save myself on the way to work, and was conveniently able to throw my rabble-rousing manager under the bus in one go. Next story. You can't use that coupon. Hey all, it's your friendly neighborhood teacher / cashier / produce-adept employee here. I have parent-teacher conferences coming up and I'm due for a haircut. I decide to go in, using 2 super clips, using one of their coupons to do so. The coupon was for a haircut for 10.99 that was location specific. I also had one for a free haircut through the app that I could use whenever. I decided to not show the coupon until the end. I got my hair cut and was expecting some small talk or something which I actually dread. But this guy was super focused on a conversation he was having with his neighbor. No biggie. When I presented my coupon at the end, the guy literally threw the coupon back at me, saying, "Oh, we don't take those ones at this location." I started to argue that the location listed specifically lists the location I was at before I was salive erupted as he spit back literally, "You can't use that coupon, sweetie." Not the good sweetie. Enter malicious compliance. I pulled out my phone, tapped the free coupon I had, and he rolled his eyes harder than my 8th graders as he scanned it. Funny thing was that I was paying with a 20, so I was going to tip the difference, which would have been like $7 or $8. Instead, I threw him a 5. With the same energy, he threw the coupon back to me. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel. Our posts